Malchus's name might not be the first one that comes to mind in the Easter story, but certainly the story in the garden is very familiar. Religion is often defined as man's attempt to devise a system to get to God. I think that Malchus's journey represents an opportunity to see how an encounter with Jesus opens up the possibility of a real relationship with God after the disillusionment of religion. My hope in this monologue is that this Easter, it will lead you to a chance to have a new, fresh encounter with Jesus. I was there that night, in the garden. So much time has passed, but I remember it as though it were yesterday. I was just a young man then, about 2 years into Caiaphas' employ, but I had admired him for as long as I can remember. As a boy, I was often in the temple with my father. He knew Caiaphas personally and regarded him as one of the up-and-coming religious leaders in Jerusalem. I felt honored to be in the presence of such learned men who were steeped in the scriptures and the law of Moses, so wise and godly. You might say that I revered Caiaphas as a mentor, as though he were one step from the Almighty himself. His father-in-law Annas was high priest, and as he was getting on in years, Father had a feeling that it wouldn't be long before Caiaphas would occupy that prominent seat in the Sanhedrin. I was so excited the day that Caiaphas took me into his household to become his personal servant, to actually be living in the household of one so prominent and so admired. I could hardly contain myself. Just to be a fly on the wall and soak in all that was being said as he met with the other Pharisees and debated the law. Not to mention that I would never have to worry about where my next meal came from. Well, as Father predicted, the next year, Caiaphas became high priest. I was so proud. It was as though the honor were bestowed on me personally. As time went on, he gave me more and more responsibility and sent me on many important errands for him. I remember thinking at the time that for a Jew of my station, I was in the absolute best place I could be. I was respected as the head servant of the high priest, and I truly lacked for nothing. Yet, as I went out on my errands and saw my fellow Jews struggling to make ends meet under oppressive circumstances, my heart would sink. How could the Almighty allow this? How could he bear watching the oppression of his people? When would the long-awaited Messiah come? And then one day, everything began to change. There was word of a religious teacher preaching throughout the countryside, and he was now on a hill just outside Jerusalem. Caiaphas sent me to listen and report back. First, I thought nothing of it. But as I went and joined the huge crowds and sat with them, I began to wonder. He spoke humbly and with such power. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Oh, those folks were poor, all right, and meek. That's how the Romans liked to keep their subjects, meek under the tyrannical rule, squeezing every penny they could squeeze out of them, regularly increasing their taxes. But you didn't hear that from me. The most that they could expect to inherit was the dust left behind by their ancestors. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Peace? Really? These were not pleasant times for most Jews. They were the people that were struggling to eke out an existence under Roman occupation. Where would they find peace? They were likely not going to eat that day for the fact that they had left their spit of land or their fishing boat to come and listen to him speak. They didn't have a learned bone in their body, yet they listened to him so intently, so enamored by his teaching. How could he say these things, make these statements, these promises? Who was this man? He continued and said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God." I had to admit, as I listened to him speaking with such authority, that I was becoming caught up in it. What was I to do? How was I to report back? This man was harmless. His words were encouraging, soothing to his people, giving them hope. As I reported back to Caiaphas, he became quite agitated. He wanted to know everything that this Jesus, that was the teacher's name, was saying. And it became my responsibility to know his whereabouts and what he was saying to the people. I didn't put my finger on it at the time, but somehow this Jesus made Caiaphas uncomfortable. One afternoon, he was speaking by the Sea of Galilee, and I heard Jesus say something shocking. He said, "It is not Moses who has given you the true bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. The bread of God is the bread that gives life to the world. I am the bread of life." As I reported his words back to Caiaphas, he was furious. And then it all made sense. This was blasphemy, plain and simple. He was calling the Almighty his Father and therefore claiming to be the Son of God. Who did he think he was? He was just a carpenter from Nazareth, for crying out loud. And you know what they say about nothing good coming out of Nazareth. A few days after the Sabbath, some neighbors brought a man before the council. They said that he was blind, but now he sees, and that the teacher had healed him. As I watched from the corner, I could see that Caiaphas and the other leaders were becoming quite unsettled. They questioned him relentlessly. They even dragged in his parents, who said that, in fact, the man was born blind. The man said, "Once I was blind, but now I see." "This Jesus is a sinner," one of the leaders retorted, "because he healed a man on the Sabbath." The whole group of them was becoming in an uproar. But the man spoke with such clarity and sincerity and said, "We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he listens to the person who does his will. No one has ever heard of anyone opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this were not from God, he could do nothing." I was frozen as I listened to the words that he had just spoken, sink in. And a fear took over my mind. There was a contradiction between my mind and my heart. I believed this man. I believed what he was saying. But what was I to do? How was I to reconcile these things? My whole life had been built on the law and what the religious teachers had said. Was I now to turn my back on all that I had believed to be true? I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out of there. And I was so relieved when Caiaphas, in his fierce anger at what he considered an insolence, ordered me to escort the man out. Not long after, I heard Caiaphas and the other Pharisees talking in his private chamber, and they all agreed that Jesus was leading the people astray. One of the leaders spoke up and said, "If we let this go on, pretty soon everybody will be believing in him, and the Romans will come and take away what little power and privilege we have." As they discussed it with each other, they became more agitated. Caiaphas responded, "Don't you know anything? It is better that one man die for the people rather than the whole nation be destroyed." I was stunned. I couldn't believe my ears. Were they deceiving me? Or were they actually planning to get rid of him, to kill him? The high priest whom I had idolized for so long, whom I'd revered as a mentor, whom I put on par with the Almighty, was now wanting to destroy him? Why? Because they were afraid that his influence would take away from their privilege and their power? I needed to get away from there, and I quietly left the room to think. The next morning, Judas came, one of Jesus' disciples, and he appeared on my master's doorstep. Although surprised, I could tell that Caiaphas was pleased, and a plot was soon hatched to arrest Jesus. I had no idea why one who had worked so closely with him was now willing to betray him. But my job was to escort Judas and the temple guards to meet with the Roman police and take him to the garden. The time drew near, and we were gathered in the garden just outside, and we went in. As we approached a group of 4 men, I felt like my body had all of a sudden become lead. Like every step I took all ounce of energy that I had available to move. Then it happened. Jesus approached, and he said, Whom do you seek? Jesus of Nazareth, a guard replied. And as Jesus was saying these words, I am he, it was like the whole ground gave away. It was like we were no longer standing on solid ground. There was some force, some power that was pushing down and driving us to the ground. Before I could catch my balance, a scuffle broke out. Next thing I knew was I felt a pain on the right side of my head. And as I held my hand in front of my face, it was covered in blood. The next thing I knew, Jesus was kneeling in front of me. He was looking straight into my eyes. His eyes were filled with compassion, filled with unspoken words of mercy and grace. He had my ear in his hand, and as he held my face, the pain went away and the bleeding stopped. And I was filled with such love and peace that I had never experienced before. And then I remembered, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God.